Do you know that many experts think that the nursery rhyme Ring Around the Rosie was written about the symptoms of the Black Death? The Black Death killed roughly half of all Londoners in 1349, and between 1347 and 1351, it killed between 30% and 60% of all Europeans. No one seemed safe to those who lived during that terrible time. Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Here's everything you need to know about the plague, including its transmission mode. Please subscribe before we dive into the deadly plague. In the middle of the 1300s, the Black Plague spread all over Europe and Asia, killing millions. No wonder it was known as the Black Death. So the deadly events began when in October 1347, 12 ships from the Black Sea docked at the Sicilian port of Messina, bringing the plague with them. People who had come to the docks were horrified to see that most of the sailors on the ships had died, and those who were still alive were very sick and covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus. Sicilian officials quickly told the fleet of death ships to leave the harbor, but it was too late. Who could have thought about the disaster they brought with them? No one could have imagined that the Black Death would kill more than 20 million people in Europe over the next 5 years, or almost one-third of the continent's population. How did the Black Plague start? Many Europeans had heard reports of a great disease on the Near and Far East trade routes even before the death ships arrived in Messina. The disease had already spread to China, India, Persia, Syria, and Egypt by the early 1340s. People think the plague started in Asia more than 2,000 years ago and spread on trading ships. However, research shows that the pathogen that caused the Black Death may have been in Europe as early as 3000 BC. Symptoms of the Black Plague. Europeans weren't ready for how terrible the Black Death was. Giovanni Boccaccio, an Italian poet, wrote that at the start of the disease, both men and women had swellings in the genital area or under the armpits. Some grew to the size of a typical apple, while others grew to the size of an egg, some more and some less. These are what people call plague boils. Blood and pus leaked out of these strange bumps, followed by several painful symptoms including fever, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, and terrible aches and pains. Soon after, the person died. The bubonic plague attacks the lymphatic system, making the lymph nodes swell. If the infection isn't taken care of, it can spread to the blood or lungs. How did the Black Death spread? The Black Death was scary and spread to everyone. Even touching someone's clothes seemed enough to give them the disease. The sickness was also frighteningly effective. People who were completely healthy when they went to bed could die the next morning. So the situation was pretty bad after all. How Black Death is caused. Scientists now know that a bacterium called Yersinia pestis is responsible for spreading the Black Death, which is now called the plague. At the end of the 1800s, a French biologist, Alexandre Yersin, found this germ. They know that the bacterium spreads from person to person through the air and by the bites of infected fleas and rats. In medieval Europe, you could find both of these pests almost anywhere, but they were widespread on ships of all kinds. This is how the deadly plague spread from one European port city to the next. Importantly, rat fleas on ships spread disease across long distances. Ship rats infected with the disease would die, but their fleas would often live on and find new rats to live on wherever they landed. Unlike human fleas, rat fleas are used to riding with their hosts. They quickly infest the clothes of people who enter houses with rat fleas and go with them to other homes or places. Since rat fleas spread the plague, it is a disease of the warmer months and goes away or loses most of its ability to spread during the winter. The Black Death spread quickly from Messina to the ports of Marseilles in France and Tunis in North Africa. Then it got to Rome and Florence, which were in the middle of a complicated network of trade routes. The Black Death had reached Paris, Bordeaux, Lyon, and London by the middle of 1348. Today, this sad sequence of events is alarming but understandable. But in the middle of the 14th century, it seemed like there was no good reason for it. How do you treat the Black Death? No one knew how the Black Death spread from one person to another, and they also didn't know how to stop it or treat it. Physicians used dangerous and unsanitary methods like bloodletting and boil lancing, as well as superstitious practices like burning aromatic herbs and bathing in rosewater or vinegar. At the same time, healthy people do everything they can to avoid the sick. Doctors wouldn't see their patients, priests wouldn't say the last rites, and store owners shut their doors. People left the cities to live in the country, but the disease followed them there too. Cows, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens, and people spread it. So many sheep died because of the Black Death that there was a lack of wool in Europe, and many people, desperate to save themselves, left sick or dying family members behind. Black Plague was a God's punishment. Because they didn't understand how the disease worked, many people thought the Black Death was a punishment from God for things like greed, slandering, blasphemy, adultery, and being too interested in the outside world. From this point of view, the only way to stop the plague was to get God to forgive them. So people thought that the way to do this was to get rid of heretics and other troublemakers in their communities. Thousands more people fled to Eastern Europe's sparsely populated areas, where they could be safe from the burning and looting crowds in the cities. Some people dealt with the fear and uncertainty of the Black Death by getting angry at their neighbors, while others turned inward and worried about their souls. Flagellants. Some men from the upper class took part in flagellant parades that went from town to town and were public displays of repentance and punishment. People in the town watched as they beat themselves and each other with heavy leather straps studded with sharp metal pieces. The flagellants did this 3 times a day for 33.5 days. Then they would move on to the next town and start the process again. The flagellant movement comforted people who felt helpless in the face of terrible events. However, it soon started to worry the Pope. The flagellants were starting to overrule his power. Faced with this opposition from the Pope, the movement fell apart. How did the Black Death end? The plague never went away, reappearing with a vengeance years later. But officials in the port city of Ragusa were able to slow its spread by isolating arriving sailors until it was clear that they did not have the disease. This created a social distance that relied on isolation to slow the spread of the disease. The sailors were kept on their ships for 30 days, a Trentino, which was later extended to 40 days, a quarantine. This is where the word quarantine comes from and is still done today. Does the Black Plague still exist? By the early 1350s, the Black Death epidemic was over, but it came back every few generations for hundreds of years. Modern sanitation and public health practices have made the disease much less dangerous, but they haven't stopped it completely. The World Health Organization says that even though antibiotics can be used to treat the Black Death, between 1,000 and 3,000 people still get the plague yearly. That's all, fellas. I hope you liked this video. Remember to subscribe and give a thumbs up. Remember to write in the comments section what part amused you the most.